都是左上左下
，OK，
然后我会拿给你，
左上这边上，
然后我拿给你。
好，可以，我们直接在这边走，我现在。
各位来宾好，欢迎来到2020 Meet Taipei 大会论坛。本次活动将在早上10点开始，那再请稍待片刻，谢谢。 各位来宾你好，欢迎来到 Meet Taipei 大会论坛。活动将在5分钟之后开始，请尽速就座，谢谢。我开始喽。
开始喽。好。
那这我开始喽，就是我会介绍一下。各位来宾你好，欢迎来到 Meet Taipei 的大会论坛。那活动即将开始，那我们先欢迎我们这次的大会主持人，数位时代总主笔王志仁，掌声欢迎。
各位女士、各位先生、各位关心新创圈以及创新创业的朋友们，大家早。那同时我也要跟现在透过 YouTube 来观赏我们现场活动及时的这些来自国外的朋友们，也要打声招呼哦。Ladies and gentlemen, friends in the startup circle and friends watch this program through YouTube, good morning. Events like this year will be very rare. 今年因为疫情的关系，其实像这样的一个线下实体的活动，在全世界都很少见哦。所以我想这个其实让我们更珍惜有这样的一个机会，在这里跟所有的新创的朋友能够有一个年度的聚会，大家在这边碰撞交流，以及希望能够激荡出更多的一些新的一些想法跟行动。今年是 Meet Taipei的第7年的展，那同时也是 Meet 创业小聚成立第10年哦。那从2011年开始，数位时代成立的创业小聚，目的是希望能够帮助台湾新创圈的朋友在创业这条路上，能够再往前再多走几步哦。那10年下来，当然我们也实现我们的承诺。那从北到南，透过大量的实际的访谈，以及举行小型跟大型的活动，把台湾的新创圈的朋友凝聚成一股社群。那不止在台湾，同时我们也组织了有几次国外的参访的活动。那同时呢，也把国外的一些包含加速器、包含天使投资者、包含国外同样新创圈的这些朋友带到台湾来，所以进行了就是同样是从国内到国外的交流。那我想这10年下来，其实也聚集了一股相当大的一个台湾创业的一个能量跟社群。那我想这一条路上，我们会再继续往下走哈。那同时，我想也呼应，就是说我们这一届新的政府的一个主题是把台湾打造成一个 Startup Island， 所谓创业岛。我想在这个部分，我们有一点小小的贡献。那当然，这个也是我们持续往下要走的一个重要的一个动力。那就是帮助台湾的新创的这个社群哈，能够就是更快、更容易的找到他们能够发挥力量的所在。那当然，我想今年是很特别的一年，就是我们还有43天就到2021年了哈。那我想对多数的朋友来讲，包含我在内，其实都希望2020赶快过去哦。好，那我想其实今年来讲，虽然说有这个疫情的各种情况，我想大家也听到过很多这方面的一些相关的一些意见跟报道。但是我想，我们如果再过几年回过头来，其实今年2020不只是疫情的一年哦。我想很多人会记住。其实今年会是很多的新创，包含创业开始崭露头角的一年哦。为什么呢？因为每一次大的一个破坏，相对的都带来一次新的机会。因为很多现有的一些可能存在的一些包含市场，包含就是企业，包含就是说产品服务，其实都做得很好。所以呢。也让这些所谓新创可能要出现的这个时机，相对的可能会被推迟哈。那往往需要有一个大的外界的力量，来让这些所谓的现有的秩序被打破，所以让新的这些可能性能够出现哦。那我想就是说，这个当然不是一个新的说法。我想这个在1930年代的奥地利经济学家叫 Joseph Schumpeter， 其实提出了一个所谓的创造性破坏的一个概念，因为他的概念是认为说，我们常常把经济的这个所谓的发展用周期循环的概念来看，但是他的看法是说，所谓周期循环是一个可能并没有那么准确。大部分情况下的这个所谓经济的发展，都是所谓新的产业的出现，汰换掉原的旧的产业，所以它并不是景气在那里循环，而是新的淘汰掉旧的。那新的力量要淘汰掉旧的，往往不是来自于就是温良恭俭让。而是来自于所谓的破坏性啊，所以就是说所谓的创新、新创，其实就是对原有的市场进行破坏。那当然，一家的力量要进行破坏，2家力量进行破坏是相对比较辛苦。当外在有个大的环境来帮助你一个大的破坏的这个前提形成的时候，那个别的小的力量在这里面就变得越来越容易了哈。那所以我想就是说，这个也是经常很多人在谈，就是说所谓的创造性的破坏这件事情。那我想这里我特别要举英国以前的首相叫丘吉尔，那我想他有一句名言讲得很好，他说千万不要白白浪费一次危机哦 ，Never let a good crisis go to waste。这个在二次大战结束前说的，意思是说 其实每一次碰到大的外部的破坏性的力量，其实同时呢，也是让新的可能性可以加速产生。那我想这个观点，特别我想，在今年我们看到疫情确实改变了很多事情啊，但是呢，它也让我们过去的很多的一些原本的一些设想，加快脚步成为现实。那也让很多原本正在现实当中进行的事情，加快变成超现实。啊，那特别是说，我们谈了很多年在家工作、远距医疗、线上教学，包含就是说5G、AI、IoT 等等这些技术，那在今年呢，都因为疫情的关系，被迫或者说是主动加快了很多发展的脚步。所以在今年虽然说我们看到有很多的一些困难冲击现有的这些企业跟工作，但是有很多的尝试，很多过去的这些可能比较微小的，在个别不同领域角落里面正在形成这个力量，在今年汇整起来，加速往前推进。好，那因为有来自一个外在的一个大的环境的破坏形成了，所以个别的这些努力跟创新更容易冒出头来被看见。啊，那这个也是我们今天的论坛，我们希望能够去更着力在讨论，就是说呢，这样的一个情形之下，我们有哪些新的冒出的机会正在形成，是我们必须要掌握的啊。所以我们今年这个主题呢 ，From Survival to Revival， 就是从一个怎么样在今年情况下先幸存，再求能够大的发展哈。In times of crisis， 特别在危机的情况之下，那我想就是说，在危机当中，危险里面看到机会哈。那当然乐观的人，往往从危机里面看到机会；那悲观的人，往往在机会里面看到危险哦。那我想，通常来讲，在座的各位，以及透过 YouTube 来观赏的，应该是属于在危机里面、危险里面看到机会的一群哦。那我们今天的论坛有8场演讲，我们分别会从4个面向来切入。那个别是从全球的创业趋势，从投融资的市场洞察、企业合作观点以及新创产业应用的4大面向，来跟各位进行分享哦。我想大家在今年应该最关心的一点是说，在目前这个情况之下，对新创团队来说，资金的这个部分到底怎么来解决哦？那所以我想我们今天的开场的第1场演讲，马上就来谈这个问题哦。So let's welcome our first speaker today, Violet from PwC Taiwan. 我们请到的是 PwC 台湾市场及业务发展部副总经理及创新创业服务执行长罗庆文，来带给我们的主题是 New Force to IPO Markets。我们掌声欢迎他，谢谢。
Thank you, John, for the invitation. Good morning, Meet Taipei. What an exciting week of the Taiwan startup ecosystem. So in the past year, I'm Violet Low from PwC Taiwan, the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurial Services. So in the past years, we have met a lot of entrepreneurs and also accompany a lot of startups from the beginning to the scales. And the questions we always ask the entrepreneurs, if you can choose a milestone, what would be the ideal milestone for you to recognize your value of the business and to realize the value of your lifetime? The answer is go to the IPO market. But as John just mentioned about, this year, because of the COVID situation, the private fund market and as well as the IPO market is a little bit shrink, but not as sad as we expect. From a report provided by PwC called Capital Markets in 2030, we see a trend. IPO activities since 2011 has been heavily influenced by the rise of new economy companies. Why do we say that? I think for all the entrepreneurs, to raise funding from the public markets is kind of like a route you must experience with. From the beginning, you may raise the fund from the angel investors. Sometimes, some companies, you may raise the fund from the crowdfundings. And when you big enough, when you at the scale-up stage, you may raise the fund from the VCs, then from the PEs. But however, in some of the day, you will go to the IPO markets to raise the money from the publics. By the PwC report, together with CB Insight, the Money Tree report, we see a trend from the Q3 of 2020, like which area of the startup topics are more attractive to VCs. You can see that the first one is internet-related topics. The second one is healthcare, then followed by the mobile and telecommunications and the softwares. You can see that the fifth is consumer products and the services. You can also see the difference, the size of the funding and the size of the deals is quite different from that. If we go deeper to see then which the IPO market is more attractive to the entrepreneur and to the startups. Of course, like the traditional big exchange market, like London Exchange Market, New York, Nasdaq, and Hong Kong and Shanghai. They are all like the most popular startup market for the companies who want to raise the money from the public sector. And the top two sectors of this market is financial and technology-related companies. If we go deeper, to see how the entrepreneurs or how the companies to choose the IPO market, the first priority is the liquidity. Because if you want to raise the money from the public market, you of course want to realize the value, the gap from the cost and to the market value. So of course, the liquidity is the first priority of the companies when they choose which IPO market they should doing the public initiative. The second one is of course valuation. I think all the startup companies are all talking about what is our valuation, which market can recognize my valuation is higher. So the liquidity and the valuation are the first two priorities of the companies when they choose the IPO market. At PwC's report, the capital markets in 2030, we see some trends for the tomorrow's public market. The first is the rise of the PEs. I think most of the entrepreneurs, if you already start to raise money from VCs, I think one of the questions they will ask you, so when are you going to go public? When are you going to IPO, right? So why they ask this question? Remember that VC is kind of a group of people and a group of funding who want to earn the financial incomes, right? So go to the market is kind of like a public and easy way for them to realize their investment and to get the money back. So the rise of the PE will also increase or enhance the development of public market. And second one is the technology. I think if you see the news report, no matter in Taiwan stock markets, US market, or the Shanghai exchange stock markets, you see more and more technology companies are going to listing in these kind of markets. So that will, of course, generate the valuation and generate the liquidity of the market. And then will attract more companies come to that market. The third one is the privatizations. What we call privatizations. For example, some like a government or state-owned companies, when they're big enough, the government may think, okay, you should go privatization. So if more of this kind of needs in the market, then the IPO markets will attract like more big companies, big public companies to go to private. Right? And then followed by the international entrepreneurs. As we say, there's no gap between the country. There's no gap between the region. So you can see the more business, they are targeting for the international markets. So the international entrepreneurs will become more and more. And the last one is the deals. As we just mentioned about, when the VC give you fund, they want to realize the investment values. So the deals, the number of deals will increase. So that also create the development of the capital market. And when we see then which area of the IPO markets, which area of startups are more attractions, you can see that we see a trend. The B2B enabling technology solutions are getting more and more hard in the market. This is a report, the monetary report shows that in the US markets, the top 10 sectors who attract the more VC activities, most of them are related with the internet. Internet is on the top of the list. And if we see the subsectors from the internet, you can see SaaS service, software as a services. There are more attractions. If we go deeper further to see which segment of the SaaS activities is more popular, you can see the first one like fintech, the artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and the capital market tech, reg tech, legal tech, etc. All these segmentations is more attractive to the investors. When we compare with for example, the China markets to the US markets, in the past, you can see a lot of small companies, small 2C companies, they are developing. But recent years, you all hear about the BAT, but Baidu, Tencent, and then Alibaba. Okay, they are big enough. In the U.S. market, of course, you hear Google, Facebook, right? They are all they are all like big technology giants in the market. Sorry. Okay. And why it leads to these trends? So in the past, when all the companies, they are facing to the the consumer side. In the past, consumers only have very selective channels to get access to the products. So in the past, the online channel acquired the customer by cash investment. For example, like if we sell consumer products, we need to build up our stores. And nowadays, you may from the O to O, right? You may from the offline to the online. But nowadays, our consumers, they have more options. They don't need to just look at your advertisement and to see what kind of the product I can choose. Nowadays, the customers have too many choices, and then they can also search the information very easily from the internet, right? So the channel is quite variance. And for the clients, in the past, the big company, they want to put more money in the advertisement or in some market campaign in order to acquire more customers. But nowadays, because the customer have too many choices, the company need to think how I retain this customer, how I increase the loyalty of the customer. So they need to use some, for example, like MarTech, to enhance these kind of activities. And in the past, when the big company provides services, probably they only provide kind of low-end products or low-end services. But however, in nowadays, you cannot only provide basic services. You need to provide different services by segment. Depends on the characteristic of your customers, or depends on the consumer behavior of your customers. So if we see the development history of B-side markets in China and the US, in US, and in the past you can see the big technology giants like SAP, Microsoft, Oracle. They are all kind of provide technology solutions to business. The business to use these kind of solutions inside of their company to increase their operation efficiency. But starting from the 2000, we see a software end revolution begin. For example, like AWS, like Microsoft Azure, right? They provide a kind of a cloud-based platform. It's a kind of open source platform to enable more startups. They can create the innovation technologies from this kind of open source platform. Starting from the 2010, and then we also look into the future. When AI, big data, this kind of we call IABCD technologies develop more and more, the companies they will use this technology to think about how this technology can enable us to increase our services to the C side, to the customer. Okay? And when we see the technology enable business to provide better serve their customer, the application area can be distinguished from the T2B, the technology enable business, or T2B2C, the technology enable business to serve more clients. So from the US and the China markets, we are all aware of like the Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, the traditional big technology giants. Their solution is to the 2B markets, right? In China, you call 金蝶, 用友, okay? In Taiwan, for example, like 鼎新, right? Their solution is for the business use. But to the 2C markets, their application is getting more wider. For example, in the US, the Amazon is not only to sell like a consumer product. The Amazon cloud, right? The AWS cloud is also provide a platform for more new innovation technology companies. Then how it works? For example, the technology companies, they use technology to collect the customer data. And they can provide or share this kind of data to the business. And the business can get more information from this kind of data and to see what kind of activities or what kind of investment they should put to attract more customers and to enhance the loyalty of the customers. For example, we take Martech for an example. In the past, for example, like a P&G, they sell the consumer products, right? And then they maybe host a lot of like a marketing campaign. But most of the time, the marketing department, we don't know if this kind of like a marketing campaign investment is efficient or not. But now, this kind of a company, they try to introduce the Martech technologies. So they can foreseen what kind of the custom activities, online and offline. And then they can put the money to the exactly market campaign or the exact channel can attract specific customers. This is how it works. But you will say that whether this kind of technology can only be affordable by the big company, can only be needed by the big company, well, the answer is not exactly. If we see the survey also from PwC to the SME, to the small and medium-sized company, we ask them, what's your need to use this kind of technology? It's like 59.6% of the answer is like they want to increase their technology application in marketing management, just like the Martech we mentioned about. And then another half, they answer that we want to use the technology to increase the client management. So now we have some like CRM solutions, for example, like Salesforce, right? They can use this kind to mentoring your sales pipeline and to increase your customer relationship management. And another 0.5% is answer that the production and research. Whether we can use this kind of technology. In the past, we built to sell. Can we, in the future, we from sell to build? Right? If we can use this kind of data information to analyze what the markets need, then we can do the more production and research just in time. And of course, most of the companies still need a lot of technology to help them to increase the enterprise management, to increase the efficiency of the operations. Okay. So just as the survey told us, the technology solution can not only be used by the big company, but also very helpful to the small companies. So for the difference is that for the big companies, they need customized, integrated products and the services. So that's why when we talk about, okay, startups to go to cooperation with big companies, the question the big companies will always ask is, are you sizable? Are your product or solution can afford our value needs? So the big company, they like more stable, they like customized, like integration solutions. But however, for the small and the medium-sized companies, they like the technology, it's like more standardized. So for the startups, you can choose which markets, which area you are focused on. If your solutions can be more standardized, perhaps the SME market is your priority to focus on, because you can provide the standard products and the services, plus a diversified value-added service to your customers, and it will become like an ecosystem. And you can also help the SME to reduce the cost for the self-development or for the self-research. It will become an ecosystem of that. And in which, like a segment market, this kind of like a T2B2C solutions will be more popular in the future. Now you can see a lot of application from the TMT, the technology, telecommunication, and the media segments. We also see a lot of like a MarTech or like supply chain technology from the retail sector. And now you can see more the application from the healthcare or even from the finance. And then in the future, these kind of like T2B2C solutions can also apply to the manufacturing. So that's why we see a lot of small manufacturing startups in Taiwan and in the global market right now. And don't forget about the education, transportation, even the culture and the entertainment. They are all like the hot topics in the future. So for the startups, the question is that, are we capable to provide this kind of like integrated services? Or can we just focus on certain vertical area? The answer is of course, right? For example, if we combine, like for example, the text and the AI, you can, in the past, you cannot imagine how the AI can enhance the company to increase or to management their tax risk. But in the future, or even nowadays, if we, the company, they all have a lot of like data or information about what kind of like tax they paid in which country, and what kind of like tax risk they will have. If this information is big enough and facilitated by AI or other technology solutions, the big company can manage their global tax risk by using this kind of technologies. So the advantages of this kind of technology is they are very flexible for deployment. They can be immediately used, and they can quick iteration. And we see some examples of this kind of technology, which we call enabling technologies. For example, the IoT, the AI, blockchain, cloud computing, and the big data. And how the business use of that. Of course, for the IoT, for example, now it's like a 5G days, right? In the past, in the 4G times, if we use, for example, like smart transportation or the smart manufacturing, if the speed of internet is not speed enough, we may not able to collect a lot of information or during the immediate react of that. But now the development of IoT can help the business to enhance these kind of abilities. And of course, the AI, right? In the question for the big companies, they all have a lot of data. I think it is also a reason why a lot of startups want to work with big companies. If they can release some data, and the startups with this kind of like enabling technology solutions, they can get the benefit, they can get the information from this kind of data and create more value to the big companies. So what's the trend we see right now? What's the benefit for the business to use this kind of technology into their business? We always talk to the startups. When you want to do the business with the big companies, certain things you should think about from their side. First, if your product, service, or solution can help this kind of company to increase their revenue. The second, whether your solution can help this company to reduce their cost of production or their cost of operation. And the third, whether your solution can help the company to enhance their operation efficiency. And the last but not the least, whether your solution can fasten the step of this company to get to the next generation, to get the next market. So our suggestion to all the startups, so when you want to do business with the companies, no matter it's big companies or small and medium-sized company, you always ask these kind of 4 questions to you when you're talking about business with them, right? Stand from their point to think about. I think in Taiwan, our advantages is in past years, we are kind of like an island of manufacturing, right? Or now we say, okay, we are like an island of semiconductor. We have a lot of experience and a lot of good players to understand the global market, right? For example, Honghai is like a very big manufacturing company for the global brand companies. So they always think about how to increase revenue, how to reduce the cost, how to enhance the operation efficiency. So for all the startups, when you start up the business, most of you, I think, is from the replication of like the B-side solution, right? You see, okay, there's kind of like a popular solution in the US market. Okay, maybe we can also adopt this kind of ideas to make a little bit adjustment and to fit the market. But when we have enough experience of this kind of things, and when you to go to the vertical market, you will see more advantages. You will see more the market needs. Then you can enhance your solutions. And in the future, if you are big enough, if you can understand more of the markets, you will get more innovation from your experience and from the market's needs. So technology enables B-side enterprises to realize the supply-side reforms. Besides of the 4 areas I just mentioned about, to think from the company side. And this is also like a further information I would like to share with all the startups. For the companies, we see if we use the technology can help us to the productivity. For example, from the build to sell to build, right? So when we fulfill that, of course the company can make the chance of the destocking, right? Okay, they can manufacture more just in time. And they can also deleveraging. For example, their finance burden may be reduced if they can build like the markets need the product more efficient. Then followed by the cost reduction. And of course, the supply storage. So I think for the Taiwanese startups, you do have a lot of opportunities. Especially, I think that the domestic market of Taiwan is not big enough to support the pure 2C business, right? Of course, we see a lot of startups. Your topics is related like platform services. But however, if our domestic market is not big enough, then you should think about how to go to global, how to attract how to build your solution to the global markets. So we suggest the T2B2C solutions is kind of a hot area. It's kind of like advantage areas for Taiwanese startups. because the technology is beyond boundary, right? You can adjust your like sales strategies. You can easier to adjust your solutions because your customer is not only for Taiwanese companies. Your customers can be companies from the all worldwide. That's our suggestion to the Taiwan startup companies. Okay. So I think I take these opportunities to share this information with you. So we are PwC. Now we also have the booths in EP03, right? So thank you for joining today's event. Then time back to John.
Let's give Violet another big applause for her insight. 我们谢谢来自 PwC 的罗副总，我想他很精彩的演讲。那如果说在这场演讲里面，我们有一个关键词要带走，那就是 T to B to C 哦，由技术来驱动的 B to C 的解决方案。那我记得在2年前的时候，腾讯的创办人跟现在的董事局主席叫马化腾，他当时提出的概念说，所谓他认为在 Internet 的这个发展，特别在中国，就是关于消费互联网，就所谓 To C 那一端，大概已经做得差不多了。所以他觉得接下来重点会是在所谓的 To B 互联网，他们称为所谓的产业互联网这一段。那我想那个是一个2年前提出的一个概念。那今天在Violet 从资本市场的这个投资角度来看，这个概念现在正在落实，而且应该在加快当中哦。那我想这是一个有趣的一个观点，就是说这个所谓 To B 互联网其实就特别针对现有这些企业，尤其是中小企业，就是说它如果是没有办法去购买过去那种属于大公司才能买的昂贵的这些软体啦、应用啦、整合方案的话，那在现在的这样一个环境底下，但是也必须要使用的情况之下怎么办呢？所以就产生很多新创的这些公司去投入的一个机会点哦。那我想特别是说，整个他的这个演讲里面，我想总结大概跟我们现在在谈的一个叫所谓数位转型这个趋势是非常吻合的，就是说那不管是跟科技有关的行业，或者传统行业，或者所谓的生活消费各种类型的，我想在今年都体会到这个压力哦。所以我想数位转型其实是一个已经不是公司列为计划，而是马上要行动的一件事情。那我想不管是说从Pony 马化腾所提到的产业互联网，从 Violet 刚才提到这个 T to B to C， 从资本市场来看的一个观点，从目前正在热烈进行的所谓数位转型的这个风潮，我想这条路其实现在越走下去是越明确，所以想也不只是现有的这些软体或者说 Internet 的这些服务公司，我想对于新创来讲，有非常多的一些空间要填补哦，所以我想这里面其实产生了很多的一些好的可能性。那特别从资本市场的这个刚才他的分析来看。不是今年2020年，是到2030年回过来看，我想就是10年的一个时间段来看，其实未来这个都充满了很多的想象的空间。好，我们再次谢谢他的演讲。那我们接下来我们今天的第2场演讲的讲者呢，是来自 Techstar。那这场演讲呢会透过 Zoom 的方式来进行哦。那因为他本人现在不在台湾。那当我们今年来讲，就整个Meet Taipei 的这个活动举行呢。确实有很多国外的这些包含讲者，或者说来参与，就是就是摊位的这些创业家，今年因为要隔离的关系，所以不方便过来哦。但我题外话是说，即便如此，我们今年的整个报名来参展的团队超过总共有553家，还是创纪录哦。那即便没有办法到现场来，他们还是非常热烈想要参与到就是整个 Meet Taipei 的活动，所以我想透过视讯的方式，其实也是一个。呼应今年这个疫情下的一个实际的一个解决方案。那来自 Techstar 这一位Ian Hathaway， 他本身呢在美国Techstar 负责创业生态的开发，与世界各地的企业家、社群领袖和机构合作，支持他们建立更好的新创生态系哦。那 Techstar 本身创立于美国，现在在全世界有超过150个国家都有据点跟丰富的业师资源。那目前在台湾也有，他们专注在深化台湾与国际生态圈的链接，加速创业者的成长，并推动企业跟新创的合作。那今天要来演讲的这一位Ian，他本身要带来的主题是 The Startup Community Way Evolving an Entrepreneurial Ecosystem。那同时呢，今天他这场演讲呢，会跟他另外一位同事叫 Oko， 他们等一下会透过对谈的方式在 Zoom 上跟我们呈现。 那接下来呢，在介绍他们两位之前呢，我要先介绍 Techstar 在台湾的 Executive Director Rosa 上台来，先帮我们做一个简单的一个开场，然后同时介绍他们两位。那我们先掌声欢迎 Rosa。
各位贵宾，大家早安！大家回应一下，我们再来一次。各位贵宾，大家早安！那非常开心 ，Techstars 能够站到这边，然后来跟大家谈论 The Startup Community Way。那就是因为 Startup Community Way 更需要大家的互动，需要大家一起来把这个 vibe 拿出来。那在这个我们让 Oko 和 Ian 能够连线上来，等一下会打上这个画面嘛，对不对？那我们在这边在打上来之前，跟大家做一些互动。那刚刚谢谢智仁的介绍，的确 Ian 他在这个 Startup Community Way 写了一本书。那我们在明天 Ian 还会 dial in， 再跟大家在 Friday morning 好好的跟大家谈论这本书。那 Oko 是跟我们 daily work on daily basis， 每一天都在扣，今天下午2点还要继续跟他扣。那 Oko 特别 dial in 进来，因为 Ian 他说，今天我们这个physical 的 event 他不能参加，但是只是他一个人 talking， 他觉得很无聊，所以我们特别商请了人在新加坡的 Oko 连线进来。那今天所有 Techstar 的 team member 都在第2排这边跟大家挥挥手。那所以我们邀请大家能够有 interactive 的互动。如果你有任何问题，您今天觉得现场没办法直接问到，也欢迎来到我们这边，或者是到我们的 booth， 以及明天早上来跟我们互动，我们都会立即把您的问题直接连接到Ian。刚刚主持人也提到，我们在台湾推动生态圈发展，协助台湾的新创团队链接国际。所以如果您想 go global， 想要连接到我们国际40-50个加速器 ，come to us。Thank you. Oko, Ian, your turn. Hand over to Oko.
So hello, Oko. Are you there? And Ian? Could you say hi and wave to the crowd here?
You're mute. Unmute. So we are all adjusting to the new dynamics, online, offline. Great.
Okay, we see you, but can we hear you? It seems there's some kind of time lag problem.
Thanks for having us today. I am Oko. Let's introduce. Let me know if you guys start
over. Ian and Oko, can you hear us? 不好意思，我们因为这个可能因为我们是现场连线，所以可能稍微有一点技术上小小的那个。
没问题，我们现在同时在跟美国这边确认一下细节。那 technical issue 现场也正在处理。那容我花一点点时间跟大家介绍一下 Oko 跟 Ian。那 Oko 他人在新加坡以及在 Techstars 有6年以上的经验。那 Oko 本人大家看了照片看不出来，他当年因为30 under 30看得出来，现在已经超过30。那他在新加坡协助像 Rakuten、Temasek， 然后也到香港，然后帮助香港地铁做非常多 corporate innovation。那其实我们也非常惊讶。淡马锡对台湾人来说的印象是，已经淡马锡这么厉害了，还需要 Techstars 带来一些什么样的帮助呢？那 Oko 本人就是在协助 Temasek 公司内部如何 drive innovation 的一个重要推手，所以其实也很开心，今天大家能够在现场，我们有机会帮大家 connect Oko。那 Oko 本人自己在 FinTech 也有非常多，他自己有成功卖掉公司，那他也在全球辅导非常多的团队，那 Oko 非常的 experience。Ian 更不用说了，他是我们的 product lead， 所以其实整个 Startup Community Way， 他和我们的 co-founder Brad Fell 一起写了这个 Startup Community。那这本书呢，现在在海关。 所以邀请各位在接下来的几天到我们的 booth 留下你的联络方式。我们有一些小游戏，大家可以拿到英文的书籍。这一本书其实要跟大家公告的是，它的运费比它的价格还贵，所以拜托大家来到我们的 booth 留下您对这本书有兴趣的联络方式。那我们玩个小游戏，大家可以获得这本书。对，那是从美国的搭飞机过来的，目前还在海关。好的，那我们 technical issue 结束了吗？那我们来做一些互动好了。我想了解一下在座的 audience， 因为 Oko Ian 常常问我说，到底坐在台下的是谁？那我们来做一点简单的调查。您是本身在 startup 里面的，各位每个人都要举手哦。没有举手，我等一下就 come to you。那你属于什么？好，你属于 startup 的，帮我挥挥手。startup 的，谢谢您。那您是在 corporate 端的，帮我举手。谢谢你们，好哟。那您是 investment VC。
Yeah, it's delicious.
Oh, a lot clearer.
Okay.
Yeah, you are back. Great. So we have Oko interview Ian. Now we will have a more interactive way.
All right. Good morning. Are we back? We are. And I think you guys can hear us.
Yes.
So if you can hear us this time, good morning to you. This is Oko. I am connecting from Singapore. And we have with us Ian Hathaway. Ian, where are you connecting from?
I am connecting from Santa Barbara, California, which
What
is
time
just
is it there?
outside of Los Angeles. It is 15 minutes till 7 p.m. on Wednesday. So happy Thursday morning to all of you.
All right. And Ian, before we get started, you were mentioning to me earlier that this is your third conference you are speaking at today. Which other conferences did you speak at?
Yeah, so I was speaking very early this morning in Oulu, Finland, which was 7 o'clock my time in the morning, and it was evening for them. I spoke in Tel Aviv, Israel, later this afternoon, or actually it was my morning, but evening for them. And now it's evening for me and the next day morning here in Taipei.
Nice. So I guess that's sort of the good thing about this whole converting into digital world and going online, huh?
Yes, except a year ago, I was in Taipei at Meet Taiwan in person, and that was a lot more fun. No offense to you, Oka, but this is much more enjoyable, or was much more enjoyable last year to be there in person.
I think the difference was the fact that we could go to Din Tai Fung together.
Yeah, well, I'm at Din Tai Fung. This is one of my favorite restaurants in the entire world. It's a joke amongst the team, but it's one of my favorite places to be.
Yes. All right. So everyone, we've heard some, earlier we heard discussions about what the trends are in the marketplace, how Taiwanese companies, big or small, are changing, and what are some global trends also happening during this pandemic time. And I wanted to ask Ian a little more questions about the larger context, right? The environment where these startups are. We at Techstars, we've been working, as Rosa mentioned, for about a little over a year in Taiwan. So we wanted to kind of share with you guys what who Techstars is, and then go a little deep into some of our framework and approaches of ecosystem development work. So Ian, with that said, let's start with Techstars, right? Can you give us a little bit of background of who Techstars is, what we've been doing, and we often talk about our network and our own ecosystem. So a little bit of background, please.
Yeah, happy to. So Techstars was founded in 2006 in Boulder, Colorado, by David Cohen, Brad Feld, David Brown, and Jared Polis, who is now the governor of that state, Colorado. And it was with a very modest ambition of making Boulder a better place for startups. Flash forward to today, Techstars is most known for its startup accelerator programs, 13-week mentorship-driven startup accelerators. We have, I think, 46, somewhere in the 46 to 50 range active today, but we do a whole bunch of other things. We're involved with startup community programs. We're part of the ecosystem development team, Oko and I. We also work with a bunch of corporate partners around the world on corporate innovation initiatives. Some of our, we have, I guess, 2,500 or so active companies in our portfolio, 5,000 founders, 15,000 mentors all around the world. And some of our companies have reached tremendous success. We've had a number of unicorn successes in recent years, a few exited at IPO. And so that's the story. But I think, we'll probably come back to this theme of ecosystems and community throughout. But I think the important story about Techstars is that the initial goal was not to be this globally distributed leading investment. According to Crunchbase, we've invested in more startups than any other investor worldwide. That wasn't the ambition. It was just to make the local community a better place for entrepreneurs.
So obviously, all that experience building, investing in startups, working with corporate partners and ecosystem players, gave us this opportunity to learn what it takes to build a community. How does that, I guess a little bit about evolution about, ecosystem development work we've done. How did that translate everything we've done at Techstars to what we're doing today?
You can view these accelerator, as I mentioned, the beginnings were a community building exercise, and these accelerator programs themselves can be thought of as an ecosystem building exercise themselves. Deeper with a smaller set of companies, but you've got to develop that mentorship pipeline and investor base as well. But what we're doing with the ecosystem development program and the program that we've been involved with in Taiwan has been one of the first, but we're really focusing on going wide. That's reaching as many entrepreneurs as we can, understanding what their needs are, trying to provide critical points of contact and to aggregate them, getting them self-organized in a supportive startup community, engaging with a range of different ecosystem actors, corporations, government bodies, collaborating with other entrepreneurial support organizations. This program is focused on providing value for the entire community rather than selecting a cohort of companies and focusing just on them, providing mentorship, education, and investment.
So let's then go straight into that framework or our approach. But before we go there, in your book that you co-authored, The Startup Community Way, you guys, the authors, you guys talked about how difference between the community, the language, the word community, startup community, we often use that a lot. And now more and more we're using this language ecosystem. What's the difference? How did it correlate with each other?
Yeah, so this was a late addition to our book, but it's turned out to be one of the things that people have latched onto the most and has provided the most value. It's a recognition that not everyone is pursuing the same agenda inside of a startup, of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. A lot of times things aren't linking up, right? Entrepreneurs think one way, corporates might think another, governments another, ecosystem support actors another. And rather than viewing that as sort of an antagonistic thing, as in some communities where, the bottom-up nature of startup community building versus the top-down, more planning and control of some of those institutional actors, it's just an understanding that the organizational forms and incentives and goals, more importantly, the goals are different, right? If you're a government body supporting entrepreneurship, ultimately what you want are jobs created. You want tax revenue. You want GDP to grow. If you're an entrepreneur, you just want to succeed, right? You want customers. All those things that the government wants are outcomes of my success. But in order to get there, we're pursuing different things. And so we take this systems view to understanding startup communities and entrepreneurial ecosystems. And we view startup communities as a system inside of that larger system of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, which sits inside of an innovation ecosystem. You can see my hands, I'm doing sort of like a Russian nesting doll. Startup community, entrepreneurial ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, economy, society, and so on, right? That startup community sits at the center of that. And within each system, there's sort of three characteristics that we think of. There are more, but I'll focus on three. The actors, so in this case, it's the people in the organization. The interdependencies, how these things are linking up. And the third is the goal. So as I mentioned, in a startup community, for us at Techstars, the way we define this and the way we talk about it in the book, the goal of a startup community is simply so that entrepreneurs will succeed. Our job, and in fact, maybe we should use a different language, us as individuals, oftentimes outside of the core responsibility of our jobs, is to help entrepreneurs succeed. If you want to get to those outcomes, we have to look for ways to help those entrepreneurs and their startups grow and succeed. It can be very simple things, such as providing event space for them to meet. It could be providing mentorship, opening up your professional networks and making that connection, or just being a listening ear, right? Building a startup is really hard. It's really uncertain. And it's remarkable how much of just a listening ear and empathetic voice with some business experience, some contacts that you can connect those people onto, maybe not in that day, but down the road, can just go a long way. At the ecosystem layer, we have more actors. We have people doing different things, investors trying to get a return on capital for their LPs, right? As I mentioned, governments trying to create jobs. Corporations have a number of different agendas that they may be pursuing. And universities, even within universities, there are different goals. And so the thing is not to say that one part of this is better than the other, or that one part gets it and the other doesn't. It's just that they're different. And it's really important to understand that. And so at Techstars, we say, you know, we're focusing a lot of the attention on the entrepreneur, and we're there to serve them. So we talk a lot about that startup community, you know, over the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
So let me be a little more direct here. You said earlier, different players in the ecosystem. Sometimes we in fact use the language. Some people don't get it, and then some do. You know, we've got a chance to work with the government in Taiwan and different players as well. And you were there last year. What was your kind of take on Taiwanese ecosystem based on your exposure?
Well, for me, first of all, I would say the broader culture to me felt very warm, accommodating, and open. I don't know what I expected. That was my first time in the country, but it felt different to me from other Asian countries. Don't want to say that, you know, they should all be the same, but it felt different to me from my experience in other cities. And oftentimes the community will reflect that. I saw a lot of activity going on. I was there during an exciting week. I mentioned it was Meet Taipei. Last time I was there, people were really excited to talk to me and open about the challenges. Felt like people were very honest about the opportunities and challenges that they saw, both at formal events and then late night events for eating beef noodles and going to night markets. One of the things that I thought I enjoyed seeing that TTA, our partner, was doing was funding many initiatives. One of the mistakes that governments can make is picking one winner and putting all the resources into that. And so that was one of the things that, Oko, I remember talking to you about this that day in Taipei, that I was really impressed that the government had the foresight to see that, to say, look, let's fund lots of different things. Let's not actually be the driver delivering that, but let's get private sector actors involved, you know, to compete over these funds and to have lots of different things going on simultaneously. For me, I think that's a very good sign, because that's not how it goes in a lot of places.
Right. And, you know, as we're talking, we're sharing some of our slides that give a little bit of kind of the overarching framework of our approach in Taiwan. We did an assessment, right? You just mentioned a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the assessment we did in Taiwan that's correlated to your observations, and also some of insights and interesting surprises maybe for you personally that you found out?
From the assessment?
In Taiwan, yes.
Yeah, so we worked with a partner that actually was speaking, maybe even speaking right now at this conference. Yeah. A friend and colleague of mine, Rhett Morris, who led that work with some of his colleagues. And one of the reasons that we chose this partner was that they take a different approach. So before I got into working with startups and in the tech sector, I was a research economist. So I've thought a lot about data, and we like to build models that neatly fit, across geographies. And so a lot of the research, or we call it an assessment, reflects these international databases, but where the data is generated by public authorities or intergovernmental organizations can easily be downloaded, and you can sort of compare and contrast. Even some of the funding databases we look at, right? You can aggregate those by country or city, but that's actually not the most important information. If you think about these, if you're interested in an ecosystem, right, an emphasis on the system, you're interested in the networks, right? You're interested in connections. And so we look at that. We wanted to know who's influential in the community, right? And one of the things that came out of that is that we felt like an entrepreneur-led community was lagging, right? There was a lot of activity happening, entrepreneurs creating great things, right? But it felt distinct from the support system going on around it. Now, that's not to say that things are not linking up. It's just that we want to see more of the entrepreneurs leading those organizational efforts. And so that's part of what our work is to do.
Yeah, and I want to share the network mapping that we actually did as part of the assessment here. Is there anything else that kind of popped up at you? For folks in the room, this is exactly a result of the assessment we did. And all those little tiny dots are basically startups and founders and different organizations in Taiwanese ecosystem. Ian, do you want to point out some different observations from this network?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit hard to read here, but what I'm seeing is that, so you're looking at a network map here, right? And the purpose of this is to visualize established relationships that could be determined based on, mentoring relationships, participation in a program, investment, right? Previous employment. One of the things that we want to see a lot of, once we see a successful, if we're talking in the tech or venture-backed space, if there's been an exit, whether by acquisition or IPO, we want to see those resources being invested back into a new generation of startups, whether through wealth, so new investors being created, serial entrepreneurship, people starting companies again, or employees, especially senior employees who are not founders at those previous companies. We want to see a high rate of that knowledge as mentors, or maybe starting new accelerator incubator programs, whatever it may be. We want to see that get recycled back in. Haven't seen a lot of that yet, but it's still early days and it takes time, right? It takes a generation sometimes for these companies to turn over and for these successes to happen. And you don't know when it will happen, but it can change things dramatically. See a lot of government-funded initiatives, which is a great thing. But as I said, want to see more of those private-led initiatives by entrepreneurs. Organizing efforts to have an entrepreneur-led, self-sustaining community. And I think those are some of my big observations.
Sorry, I pulled you into the assessment, and like Ian said, actually, Rhett Morris, who was instrumental in running this assessment, is actually speaking at the orange stage right now, at the TTA stage. So, and we will be sharing these assessment results, written out ones, with you all. So we just went into the assessment and roadmap part of kind of what we do with our ecosystem development work. We also talk about leveraging the network. What does that mean? How does that translate in the local community versus, networks that Techstars brings in?
Yeah. So we think it's vital to have a team on the ground executing, right? We're not consultants who fly in and drop off a roadmap and say good luck. We actually want to be the change agents, but that requires day-to-day engagement from people within that community who have existing relationships, understand the culture, and are looking to build a better future for themselves in that community. You mentioned leveraging the network. I think this is one of the things that Techstars uniquely brings, is that we have this very large network that you showed earlier some of the statistics about the number of founders in our network, mentors, investors. These are people that we have strong relationships with, and we have the ability to leverage that to access those resources for the benefit of the Taiwanese community, in particular for the founders. That can manifest through a bunch of different channels, whether it's getting local startups with special access to applying to an accelerator, whether it's getting an all-star mentor who has some unique insight to offer one of the companies, whether it's a key relationship with a corporate in the United States that you want to have a partnership with. It could be a bunch of different things. But the important thing to understand here, like all relationships in a startup community, it cannot be transactional. You have to build that social capital first, that relationship capital. You have to build trust and you have to give into it. So one of the things that, our esteemed colleagues on the ground in Taipei, Rose and David, they're building amazing relationships within the company and building authentic relationships, looking for ways to help. We have a motto called Give First, which is looking for ways to help people without having an expectation for receiving something in return immediately, right? It's not pure altruism. You're not naive. You expect to get something in the future. You just don't know when, from whom, or in what form. And so an example of this, which I can tell you this pays dividends over and over again, I'm a mentor for a number of different Techstars accelerators, which means I give substantial amounts of time to help entrepreneurs succeed. These are entrepreneurs in communities where I don't live. I'm mentoring entrepreneurs in Iowa right now, and I've never even been there. But I'm giving up significant amounts of my time. And by doing that, first of all, I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. I want to see these entrepreneurs succeed, and it's going to pay me back somehow, right? There are interesting opportunities that will unfold. The managing director who's running that program may be the person that provides to me the relationship connection that I need 5 years from now that sort of opens up my entire career for me, or something along those lines. You just don't know. And it would all be because I came in service to that and didn't immediately just say, hey, I need access to this thing, right? And you have to approach this the same way you would approach any relationship, whether you're moving into a new neighborhood or your child is starting a new school, right? You look for ways to be helpful and kind and friendly and assume that you're building this community of trust, and that when that happens, you will benefit as well.
Those attitudes and mindsets seem very simple. And oftentimes, we've heard questions such as, you're organizing these events, these activities, or you're just connecting people. How does those little activities or those steps connect to improving the larger ecosystem? Because we use that word on the other hand, right? How does that, people often, I feel like, want to see major milestones, shiny, big successes, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, join the club. Everyone wants that everywhere. And yet it eludes us, right? I mean, you need those things, right? You need these big events. You need, nice buildings. You need those sorts of things, but it's not everything. And if you study, the history of Silicon Valley, for example, it's really about the relationships and the culture, the attitude. People were collaborative while being competitive. They put the cause of advancing technology and the sustainability of that region, that ecosystem, above any one individual's agenda, any one person or company. right? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to build relationships with people to the point where they're trusting to share, right? The valuable resources in an entrepreneurial ecosystem are intangible. Knowledge, right? Hard-earned knowledge that comes from the grind of building companies, challenging the improbable, sharing relationships that you've built over the years, right? You know, if you're an investor making that decision, making a high risk decision on a company that may or is most likely to fail and might pay off big 10 years from now, right? This requires, you know, repetitive interactions, right? Reinforcing behavior, changing attitudes and mindset, and that takes time. And that's why you've got to do it. That's what the work is. You know, otherwise, you know, I think about one of the ways I can think about it is I've worked in co-working spaces that were not very nice, right? You know, terrible conditions, but there was a strong sense of community, right? And it was a lot of fun, and people were sharing and eating together, and, you know, exchanging connections. Someone works for that company and I'll work for this one, and then maybe we'll change, and that kind of thing would go on. But I've also been in really nice WeWorks and no one talks to anyone, right? And so it's just a building, right? A building is not a community. It's what's going on inside of that. And so for me, it's really about relationships, and in particular, relationships built on trust.
So then I feel like that leads me to my next question, which is the KPIs and measurements, right? In order to see a progress, for us to even measure our work, we need to be able to look at some metrics. What are those?
Yeah, so let me just preface this by saying, you know, I studied economics in graduate school. I used to work at the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, right? I come from a world of data and models. And I mostly don't care about those quantitative measures for understanding ecosystems, right? It's the qualitative nature. It's, you know, I want to know if as a result of the work we're doing, is it easier for entrepreneurs to find the resources they need? Is it easier for them to get that connection that's required to move to the next step? Can they find their co-founder or that technical talent they need more easily? Right? Do they feel supported on the journey? Do they feel like they're a part of something bigger? Right? Those are hard things to measure. I know we are a little short on time, so I'm not going to go into that. I have a whole chapter in my book called The Measurement Trap, which is basically saying, you know, there's an inverse relationship between the ease with which things can be measured and their impact on the long-term improvement of a startup community, right? So the things that really matter, you know, connectivity, culture, those are hard to measure and they take time to unfold. So my plea is to think really hard about what it is that you're trying to understand. Try to move past these macro level indicators. They're not that useful. They're outcomes of processes that took place a long time ago that we're actually trying to understand. We want to understand those processes. And so just getting really clear on what it is that you want to know. Who's attending events? What are they thinking of it? What was the impact, right? It doesn't matter how many people come to this. It's what happens after. Look for creative ways to understand that. Track the same people over time. See how things are changing and evolving. Are people, how's retention, right? Are people coming to these events repeated, or do they come once and not show up again? Those are the kind of things I want to measure, and they're difficult to get at.
Yeah, and to wrap it up, Ian, like we mentioned earlier, has co-written this book right here, The Startup Community Way, and we will be. So a lot of the questions that I just asked and things that Ian, you know, ran out of time sort of covering, you'll find it in the book. The good news is that we're going to talk about this book. Ian will be talking about this book tomorrow at the Orange Stage, I believe. Yes, Orange Stage at 10 a.m. in Taiwan time. So please join us for that. And any last comment, Ian, that maybe I didn't ask you?
Yeah, no, I guess I just, you know, looking at these two books, thinking about the evolution of, you know, Brad's thinking in startup communities, the founding of Techstars, right, where the startup community way is going. I just want to make a plea that all of us that are not active entrepreneurs, don't forget what we're doing this for, We're doing it for the entrepreneurs. Don't lose sight of what this is all about. And if you're not sure what to do to help an entrepreneur today, go out and find one and ask them how you can be of service. Do the best you can to help them, right? It's very simple. It might even just be checking in on a friend who's building a company. How are you? You know, are you doing okay, right? You never know what that could do. And then if that was a positive interaction, ask them to do the same thing for someone else. And so with that, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Yes, give first in your own ways and work together as a community. Thank you very much, Ian, for joining us late evening. Third conference done. Do you have another one coming up?
I have the red wine in my living room with my wife conference, so I'll leave it there. But have a great day. Thanks for having me, Oko. It was good talking to you.
Good talking to you, Ian. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Talk to you guys later. See you soon.
Thank you, Ian and Oko. Thank you. 我想虽然说一开始有一些技术的问题，但是他们的这个演讲内容还是蛮精彩的但我一直怀疑是说他后面那个鼎泰丰那个应该是海报或者壁纸，因为里面人一直都不动哦。OK， 好，那我想就是说在 Ian 的这个跟刚才 Oko 他们的这个对谈里面，其实很明确的，其实把所谓的现在创业的活动，不再是说像以前在美国的车库或者台湾的公寓里面去自己闷起头来去做事哦。现在其实是除了闷起头做事之外，还要打开门走到外面去，跟很多的创业生态圈的这些朋友去交流。那不管是说这些人里面有可能是将来你的投资者，有可能是你潜在的用户，或者是上下游合作的这些供应商。那这件事情呢，就变成说不是等到你的产品或服务都 ready 完成之后才开始的事情，而是说从你的创业最初的阶段就要进行了。所以就说创业不再只是一个团队，一家公司。一个地方单独做的事情，而是说怎么样跟这个社群建立起关系，在这个生态圈里面去交流这些意见跟资源哦。那我想特别是说，刚才他Ian本身也提到是说，那这件事情其实很难用一个 KPI 的数字去衡量。那虽然他自己也提到是说他是经济学的硕士，也在这个联邦储备银行有工作过，但是呢，他其实不认为说所谓的创业生态或者说创业的这个社群是用量化的方式去评估这个相关的投入跟产出的结果，更多是一种所谓值的一种概念哦。那我想更多是说，你怎么样去投入到这个社群里面去，透过这些参与活动交流，有产生你有一些 input 的，有一些人家给你的 output 的过程里面，去慢慢累积产生的这样一个事情哦。所以我想就是说，虽然说这个分享因为这个线上的关系，当然我想跟我们实际在台上讲有一些不一样，但是他们的这个很多的 insight 还是值得我们参考的。好，那么接下来下一位讲者呢，也是透过 Zoom 的方式来到现场跟我们连线哦。那这一位来自矽谷的讲者呢，本身呢是他相信在疫情发生之后呢，所有的创业家最在意的事情呢，不外乎就是生存跟募资哦，这是很实际的。那以及如何在疫情当中夺得经济复苏后的反弹先机。那 Marvin Liao 就是我们接下来这位讲者呢，本身是曾在美国知名的加速器500 Startup 里面担任合伙人，那也投资 C Fund 跟种子阶段的这些新创，在过去6年当中，他曾经参与投资了超过400家公司哦，是经验非常丰富的创业投资人。那今天他带来的主题是 How the pandemic has changed investing， 就是这一次的疫情如何改变了这个新创的投资。那我们掌声来欢迎这位我们接下来这位讲 Marvin Liao， 谢谢。
All right, we can start now. All right. Okay. I can go?
Marvin, can you hear us?
Right. Hi, everyone.
Okay.
This is Marvin. I'm calling from Eastern Europe. I'm sorry I'm not able to join you right now, but unfortunately Taiwan is very, very restrictive to folks coming in from the US. So I was told to talk a little bit about startup investing during the pandemic and some key lessons I've learned over this 2020. All right, so let's get started. And so, who I am. My name is Marvin. I used to be a partner at 500 Startups. I'm now an angel investor and been advising a bunch of family offices. I've been in San Francisco now for about 21 years. Started off in startups. My first startup I was at raised about $64 million. Was an executive at Yahoo for about a decade and a half. And like I said, most recently was a partner at 500 Startups, where I invested in over 414 pre-seed and seed stage startups. And so during this time, I learned a little bit. And so I left 500 Startups end of 2019. And this year was kind of my angel investing, mentoring, and speaking year. And so I've been spending a lot of time on my portfolio companies. And as you know, we had this thing called COVID. And so unfortunately, this pandemic sort of really changed everything. And this is actually what I'm going to be speaking about. I'm going to be talking a little bit about, I think, sort of what has been happening over this last year, and a lot of the changes that have actually happened, right? Like dramatic changes that have actually affected the startup ecosystem. And I can tell you, it was a dramatic, unlike Taiwan, most of the world, Europe, US, many parts of Latin America as well too, went into full shutdown. And because of the shutdown, this actually has affected a lot of consumer behavior. This has actually affected a lot of large enterprise behavior. We've seen even a lot of the airlines, we've seen their business basically drop 97%. We've seen a lot of the, I would say one example as well too, that was dramatic affected. A lot of small businesses were actually forced to shut down for about 4, 5, 6 months. In some cases in San Francisco, Bay Area, for example, a lot of the restaurants have been closed for almost like 8 months now. And so that has dramatically shifted and affected a lot of industries and businesses. But what hasn't changed is actually venture capital. Venture capital is still going strong. The reality is that our business model for VCs is you're still supposed to be investing and still going after and trying to find sort of these home runs, what we call home runs, these like multi-billion-dollar businesses. And so the reality is that from a long-term perspective, even though there's been this big pandemic, there's been this recession in many countries, venture capital as an industry still continues to do what we're doing, partly because of the fact that our timelines are just very long, right? So a typical exit for venture capitalists, when we invest typically at a pre-seed or seed stage, we will not be seeing returns probably for another 9 to 12 years. A typical unicorn takes 9 to 12 years. And so this recession hasn't really affected dramatically too much our industry. And so, what has happened, at least in the US between March and June, there was a massive slowdown, right, of deals, partly because many of us were very active in the last couple of years. We have a large portfolio of companies. And so our focus of why we stopped doing deals in March, April, June, March, April, May, June, there was a slowdown, partly because many venture capitalists were like, what do we do now, right? Like there's this big pandemic, everything's changing. Your focus is actually not on finding new deals. Your focus should actually be on taking care of your portfolio company. So that's exactly what happened. Many of us were very busy in March and April and May, focusing on our old portfolio companies, making sure they had enough money to survive, making sure that they were working on their strategies and still effectively dealing with all the changes. And so that's actually what happened. But the reality is there was also still a lot of money in venture capital, at least in the US. So just in Q1, so January, February, March alone, venture capitalists raised, I think, close to $21 billion in capital. So there's actually still a lot of money out there. And so what we saw was that, from when the pandemic hit the US in March, April, and May, for a lot of VCs, besides taking care of your portfolio companies, there was a very big shift towards this video call paradigm of not being able to meet people, like meet new founders. And so we all had to go and find a new way of how to sort of like operate in this, sort of like this world. And so there was a slowdown, both taking care of the portfolio companies and trying to orient toward this new world. There was a shift. And what you saw basically in, come like end of June, July, the market actually came back very strong. And so look, what you'll see if you look at the deal flow of like, June, July, August, September, it's been the craziest, even October, it's been the craziest I've actually seen from a deal flow perspective. And I think this actually reflects a lot of the digitization wave. And so if you saw, for example, like in the US alone, we saw, previously, say in 2019, because prior to COVID and the pandemic and the lockdowns, for every $100 that was actually spent in retail, probably about $10 actually went. So 10%, $10 actually went to online retail. You know, fast forward this year, we saw change from like for every $100 that was spent in retail, about $40 has actually moved to retail. So we saw a quickening of all these trends that were happening already, right? The remote work trend, that, you know, that fast forwarded, like, you know, almost 40-50% Americans are working sort of like at home now. So that was happening before. Now it's moved much faster. You know, so the work from home trend, the e-commerce trend, the digitalization of just like a lot of companies being forced to sort of adopt a lot of technologies to utilize, you know, to allow their workers to work from home. This digitalization wave really sped up much faster, right? So for example, in the e-commerce, what should have happened over 5 years happened literally 1 year. And we've also seen, for example, for a lot of big companies, the digitization wave of virtualization, digitalization, you know, technology adoption, you know, we've seen what should have happened like, you know, in sort of like 4 or 5 years happen really in 6 months. And so there's this huge change, which is actually a huge opportunity for a lot of startups. And if you take a look at the stock market, this actually really reflected it. The blue is really the NASDAQ, which is really more of the overall technology side. So if you take a look at the growth of the technology space in the stock market versus the growth of sort of like the rest of the economy, there's a huge changeover. And I think this actually really reflects the digitization wave overall, which is, like I said, a really good thing for technology companies and for startups overall. And so this is something we should be very excited about. And because of that, also, we're seeing sort of like this VC activity is really bifurcating. And what I call the tale of two cities is this idea of just like, if you take a look at what was happening, you know, over the last like 4 or 5 months, you know, at least in the early stage venture capital side. So prior to Series A, like very early, there was this huge wave of money that actually flowed in. So deal flow in this area has been hotter than I've actually seen in the last like 6, 7, 8 years. And so that has actually been a huge change in general, at least for my stage. And partly because of the fact that it's just much easier to cut a check of like $500,000 or $1 million over Zoom than it is to do like a 20 or 30 or $40 million check. You know, and so that's what we found is, at least in the post-Series A, you know, deals are happening in the post-Series A. I think it's just taking a little bit longer for a lot of these bigger VC funds to orient toward this new world. And so I do think it is much more challenging if you haven't really met a founder to write like a $20 million, $50 million check. It is much easier writing a $500,000 or $1 million check, but it is starting to happen now. And so you're starting to see sort of mechanisms of just a lot of later stage VCs are writing big checks now, but it has taken them at least the last like 6 to 7 months to sort of get used to this world, but it is starting to happen. And the reality is that I think we are stuck with this pandemic, at least in the rest of the world, unlike Taiwan or Vietnam or Australia or New Zealand, which I think has done a great job of really handling COVID and been doing this without a lockdown. As you've seen in Europe now, Europe has gone into lockdown again. US has been in lockdown for a long time. And so unfortunately, sort of like even with the vaccine, you know, we'll still be in lockdown and in sort of dealing with a pandemic. At least the rest of the world is going to be dealing with a pandemic through, I think, like 2021 and probably early 2022. And so I think the state of the world is probably not going to change too much. And so I'm going to talk about some trends that I think are very applicable, I think, across most of the world right now. And so, you know, we'll talk about the COVID casualties, you know, areas that I think, unfortunately, are going to continue to be affected very, you know, at least for the near term. And I think startups that are tackling this in these spaces are still going to be affected in the long run, at least for the next year or so. And so we call COVID casualties. I think travel, tourism industry, I think, are going to be very challenged spaces for venture capital, like for venture capital investing. I think anything in the events and conference business, I think, is going to be challenging unless you're like Hopin, moving sort of like conferences to more virtual. I think ad-driven businesses will be challenged, right? One of the first things that gets cut during a recession is usually ad-driven businesses. And, you know, no surprise, like, you know, restaurants have been shut down for a while. A lot of restaurants are just not going to survive. So we're seeing this area is going to be, if you are a restaurant-focused software business, that is probably going to be a really challenging area in general for the next year or so, at least. Areas that are of interest, of course, in growth, ed tech, right? Most schools, at least in the US and Europe, are shutting down or opening and shutting down all the time. So it's very, very complicated. So a lot of parents are looking for alternatives. The digital healthcare we've seen has, just really grown. So I've invested in a bunch of telehealth companies that were kind of not growing that quickly. In 2019, the adoption was just a lot slower, partly due to regulation, partly due to consumer sort of like conservatism. Because of 2020 and COVID, we've seen this, the growth of telehealth and digital health really has been huge. E-commerce, no surprise, e-commerce infrastructure that enables e-commerce has been huge. Cybersecurity, partly because of remote work and corporations need to secure this remote work infrastructure, has been on a growth tear. And so we're seeing a lot of companies do well in fundraising here. Other key areas, warehousing, delivery automation, no surprise, due to COVID. Supply chain management has been, with a shift of supply chains outside of China, we're seeing a lot of software interest here. And of course, Internet of Things and manufacturing 4.0. This is really a big area and sector of growth for VC investing, in my opinion. Less obvious areas, gaming, gaming prior to 2020 was not an area of growth. And so we've seen that really skyrocket, media, partly because people are able to spend more time at home. And what I think it should not be a surprise, I guess, is enterprise SaaS and a lot of SMB focused SaaS companies have grown quite a lot. And so if you are a SaaS focused company in SMB, what we're finding, what was a big surprise for me in the US, partly due to a lot of these changes, it was very challenging at the beginning of the year, but, fast forward like July, August, they're partly, I think, due to all the layoffs in the US and the resilience, I think, of sort of like the job market, we've seen actually a 40% increase of new business registrations in the US. And so I think this shows the adaptability of like really the tech ecosystem and the adaptability also of just the economy in the US. We've seen a lot of new business growth in the US. And a lot of that, I think, is due to SMBs. A lot of SMBs are starting now using what we call omni-channel, right? They might be online, but they also have an offline presence. In many cases, these are offline stores that actually have an extensive online presence using Shopify, using all the latest sort of like software. And so SMB focused SaaS has actually been an area of growth over the last couple of months, which I've been pleasantly surprised about. I thought they would have been really highly impacted. In some cases they have. So a lot of the old world offline stores have been dramatically impacted, but we've also seen them adopt a lot of software to sort of like really lower their cost structure and to increase their sales channels as well too. So SMB in the US is growing very quickly. So a couple of lessons that I've learned over the last, and I think I've like 5 to 10 minutes left of the presentation, a couple of lessons I've learned of the overall ecosystem. I thought that there would be a lot higher death rate in the startup ecosystem. And I think what has been really sort of like has made me very optimistic about the rest of this year, optimistic about the next couple of years in general, is really a lot of startups were able to adjust and change. And the death rate was a lot lower at least even in my portfolio of over 400 companies, the death rate was a lot lower than I thought it would have been. And I think a big part of just like this mission and this resilience of the startup ecosystem, these startups, has been very high, which has been great. And I think the other thing is just like, because they're startups, they were able, partly due to sort of like a lot of time, I think a lot of investors spent with their portfolio, a lot of startups were able to cut and manage costs very tightly, particularly when the pandemic hit in March, April, and May. And a big part was just pivoting, right? Like they were able to pivot their businesses partly through cost structure changes, but also pivoting their businesses into targeting new customer segments, which I think really allowed them to survive and grow now. And that has been a really pleasant surprise. And so what I would say for a lot of startups right now is that, it's actually now's the time to be pivoting your business. If you want to change certain aspects, to focus your time on building the product, to focus your time on doing a lot more customer development. The reality is that 2020 is kind of a write-off, right? Was sort of like a flat year for most industries and businesses. So no investor really expects you to get a lot done this year. And so if I look at my portfolio in general, probably only 20 to 25% of my portfolio has had a crazy skyrocketing business, partly because they were lucky, partly were prepared, had either raised a lot of money prior to the pandemic, or what they had done is actually they happen to be in industries that growth industries that happen to do very, very well, that were COVID beneficiaries. So for folks who are not COVID beneficiaries, now is a really, really good time to go and focus on basics and potentially reposition the business for the future, or potentially focus on new customers. One of the things now too is just like, because of this time that a lot of us have now, is that this is also a great time to be, rebuilding your network and building relationships, whether it's fundraising relationships, whether it's rebuilding sort of like customer ties, spending more time with your customers. This is actually really, really important. And because of this lack of expectations of growth in 2020, now is the time to be doing this to prepare for the future. And one of the things is because, especially in this time of the pandemic, when you can't meet people as much anymore, this is actually where introductions really, really matter. So all the network that you're establishing right now will be really, really critical as you start building your networks through introductions, whether to customers, through introductions to warm intros to potential investors. What we're finding is that investors are leaning more into introductions, these warm intros now, as a filter function for you, right? And the same thing with customers. Customers are really leaning into trying to get references. And so now is the time to be spending time building these relationships. It's really, really critical, especially in a time when you cannot meet, when you don't have conferences. When most of these conferences tend to be virtual, these introductions is an area that I would really, really recommend sort of building the relationships and building your, sort of like using this to build your ties. Fundraising is one of the tips I use in general, is that you should treat fundraising like enterprise sales, right? Using CRM systems, through introductions, tracking and follow-up in general, right? And sort of tracking them through the funnel overall. And this is the way you should be treating, enterprise sales is just like fundraising. Fundraising is just like enterprise sales. This is a skill set you should be learning right now. And last of all is sort of like really learning to Zoom well. When I say Zoom, is like, presenting on video calls. There's a whole new etiquette of actually doing Zoom calls now. There's a whole new etiquette of presenting, right? Like sometimes you want to be able to use slides, but you need to be prepared that sometimes when there's technical issues, say for example, when Zoom sharing doesn't work, which has actually happened to me personally before, this is actually really important that you learn to present well and learn how to manage without sort of like slides, learn to project energy, learn how to manage and loop in people in these calls. There's a whole new methodology of actually doing video calls, and for better or for worse, partly because we aren't able to travel as much in at least for the next year. When you're doing sales, when you're trying to do fundraising on Zoom, there's a whole new art to doing this. And so practice and learning how to manage this well, I think will also be a skill set that I think will do you very, very well as a founder in the future. And so overall, I would say, 2020 has been really a pretty crappy year for most folks. But, I would say this is also a very eye-opening year, partly due to the fact that, I am very, very bullish about sort of the startup ecosystem. I'm very, very bullish about, I think, where the overall global economy is going with all these changes. And so the analogy I use is that, in the 1918, people forget in 1918, there was a very, very big pandemic called the Spanish flu that really tore through all of the US and Europe and across the globe, killed something close to 50 to 100 million people. Plus we were recovering from World War I. And so, 1918, 1919, were pretty awful years. It kind of reminded, in some ways, probably in many cases worse than 2020. But, if we saw for 2020 to 2020, 2020, to about, like 1918, 1919 sucked, but 1920 to about 1929, these were like crazy good years, partly because of the new consumer behavior that happened, partly because of just like all the new sort of like economic changes, the tightening of sort of the global economy, the changes in consumer behavior, the art, the music, like all the things that actually happened during time was really a boom time. I actually think the same thing is going to happen because of this big, massive change in consumer behavior, the big, massive change in sort of the world economy, the big, massive change in technology adoption overall, very similar to what happened in the 1920s. I'm very, very bullish for what I see in the startup ecosystem. I'm very, very bullish for what I see in the overall economy. I think from 2022, 2023, 2024, I think is going to be one of the most exciting times that I think we as people have actually will have been through, mark my words. And so I think I'm especially bullish for the startup ecosystems, that all the seeds that have been set in 2020, I think are going to set us up very, very well, both from the investor perspective and also both from the startup perspective. And so that makes me very, very optimistic. And I hope you are very, very optimistic as well too. And so I think this is my presentation. Thank you very much, for your time. I'm so sorry I'm not able to be there to do this live. I love Taiwan, and I wish you all, the best of luck. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. 谢谢来自500 Startups 的前合伙人 Marvin。目前他是一个个别的投资者的精彩的演讲。那我想。当他的这个报告里面也分享到一些，就是说他所看到的现在有机会的一些产业哦，那大概可能跟我们原先的预期大概也出入不大，那只是说从一个投资者角度来看，就确实现在来看，是一个相对好的机会，就是因为很多新的需求因为疫情的关系而产生，而且应该会持续一段时间。好，那我们接下来就是我们今天上午的第4场的演讲哦，就是我们接下来这位讲者来自酷基科技。那酷基科技本身是2018年从宏基分拆独立出来，那它的定位是打造能提高生活品质的智慧周边产品。企业作为新创生态系的一部分，酷基科技这2年投入与新创互动，希望透过与新创和企业的合作，产生外部创新的可能性哦。那接下来呢，我们就来欢迎来自酷基科技的创新平台事业处总处长 Lucia 廖带来他精彩的演讲，我们掌声欢迎他，谢谢。
Hey everyone, I'm Lucia from Gadget Take. So it's my honor to be here to share with you our experience. So first of all, just let me. Okay. So in today's presentation, I will break my the whole session into 3 parts. First of all, introduce who we are, and then talk about our innovation journey. And the last part, we will also go through the partners we are looking for. So our company is a group. We have more than 40 years history. I think few people in Taiwan don't know us. And we were founded in 1976. As one of the top ICT company in the world. So far, we have close to 8,000 employees in the world. And also, you can see our products in more than 95,000 retail stores across 160 countries. Actually, we don't just provide the hardware. We also have the software and also the service altogether. Like John just mentioned, in the past, Gadget Team, we were just one product business unit within Acer Inc. Just like laptop, display, desktop, or monitor. So just 2 years ago, in order to really promote the innovation and the entrepreneurship within the company, we were spin off from Acer Inc., still within Acer Group. Our mission is really to create and come out something different from in the past that can enhance people's quality of life. Being a spin-off company, I would say it really gives us a lot of flexibility and the space to do something different. So here I want to give you a glance about what we have. We start from the PC peripherals like keyboard, mouse, and also the storage charging card. And then we also have the multimedia gadgets like the audio headsets or speakers, and the visual gadgets like a webcam. On top of that, we have the gadget connect a lot of devices, not necessary to be PC only, and the full lineup of protection gears. One of the category we heavily invest is the wearable, the IoT. For example, we have the LipWear. That's a smartwatch, also used in 2017 Taipei University sports game. And another gadget that makes us quite famous is Lipbeats, 智慧佛珠. I saw a lot of people knocking your head, right? And on top of that, not long ago, we also come out the gaming chair and its premium brother, the gaming cave, which I will elaborate a bit later on. All right, so I think you have a rough understanding around our company. So in the second session, I want to share with you our innovation journey. Okay, this chart is actually the revised version from Tim Brown's growth matrix. And that is how we use internally to think about what kind of growing strategy we should use. So basically, it's defined a different strategy based on whether you are shooting for existing or new target audience. And then in the vertical part, it means we are using existing or new know-how. So like most of the corporates, in the beginning, we are used to stay in the lower left-hand corner. That means we add some new features which we are familiar with into the existing products to serve the existing customer base. That's the most, I would say, easy part, right? And of course, it still works, right? There is still some growth. However, the growth is relatively limited. So it enforces us to think about we need to move us to other quadrants in this growth matrix. So here I want to give you some example. The first one is our Thronos Gaming Cave family. So let me show you two videos here to show how it works. We integrate our most premium PC and peripherals into this giant mechanical structure in order to provide a totally immersive gaming experience to our target audience, that's the gamers. That is generation 1. Sorry, it should be another, the previous video. Okay, then here comes the second generation. We call it Thronos Air. The reason we name it Air is because we put it lighter and more space saving in order to be more affordable and also accessible to more gamers. And there is an Eastern egg hidden in the later session. So as you can see, there are 3 curved monitors supported by a giant mechanical arm here. Okay, here you go. We actually merge the massage function into the overall gadgets here. The reason we do so is because we observe the pain point in most of the gamers. Because we see a lot of them actually have the sore muscle after playing the competition. So no matter for generation 1 or generation 2, actually you will see, the mechanical design for how to sustain this heavy stuff with the arm, and also how to put the massage function into the gadget. These 2 items are not our domain know-how at all. But during the process, we've been working with 2 startups to enable the home procedure and also to absorb their expertise in order to overcome the overall challenge and put it to the market. So in this one, actually we are serving the existing target audience, but using the new domain know-how from external parties. So here I want to show you the second example, e-grocery. Let's play the video. I think many people in Taiwan know we've been doing Libits, 智慧佛珠, for Buddhism. However, few people may know we have also done so for Catholics. And this is the one we work with the most influential, we call it KOL, the Holy See. So this video records the press conference held in Venticum. As you can see, not only the executive from Gadgetech, but also a lot of important people and their opinion leader from the Holy See join and also endorse for this campaign. This is how it looks like. We on purpose designed the package exactly look like a Bible. So actually, we work in several quarters, very closely with the Venticum team and also with One Stop in order to make the overall software user interface smoother and more user-friendly. All right, so no matter Libits or e-grocery, they belong to another quadrant. That's something we use our existing domain know-how, how to make it wearable. But here, we extend to a totally different community. That's the religion group. So during the home process, if there is no external experts, including the startup we mentioned, it's not possible for us to really make such gadgets to really facilitate the praying behavior of believers and make the overall user interface really close to the practical case. So after several successful stories, our confidence for working with external partners are getting higher and higher, not only with big companies, but also with many younger ones. Therefore, we decide to formalize the process, not just treat it as a side job, but really to set up a dedicated team to engage with startup and think about how we can create the value altogether. Our mission is really to discover and proliferate the bold and innovative ideas with ecosystem partners. So there are three cooperation ways we have with the ecosystem. The first one is so-called sales and channel cooperation. That means we buy the solution, could be IP, could be some technology, or sometimes even the finished goods from the startup, and sell in our channels. And of course, could be vice versa. And the second one is develop and operation collaboration. That means we visit each necessary component during go-to-market process, see what's missing in startup side so we can fit in and complement. This part I will elaborate in the later page. And the third one is so-called marketing collaboration. I think that's especially valid for what Valerie just mentioned, the T2B service provider. For example, if we notice that some service can really help us to solve our pain point as a corporate, we can start to validate within our team and then decide if it should go spread to the whole Acer group as a kind of pilot project. By doing so, we will be more and more sure if we should join the team to promote their service altogether, not only in Taiwan, but also go to the global world. So this is the breakdown we did for the whole go-to-market process. Starting from design, some startups, maybe they only have some ideas or some concept, but they don't know how to continue. In this way, we can help them to do the validation. The validation can be from different aspects, technical-wise, finance-wise, legal-wise, or sometimes mass production-wise. These all are the items, the checklist we need to undergo in order to move on. And the third one is promotion. No matter online, offline, no matter in Taiwan or go foreign countries. And the fourth one is distribution. It's mainly rely on our logistic network in the globe. And of course, what matters is also the service. No matter it's about the call center setup or repair swap service, that's all necessary component if you want to bring the products or service to the market. And of course, during the whole process, some professional opinion from legal, HR, finance, or tax point of view are also required. This could be a luxury to most of the startups. However, we will select some startups based on our bandwidth at the time to give them such resources from Acer Group point of view. So when talk about this year, we have received information or invitation from more than 300 startups so far. And around 100 of them we have been meeting, no matter it's face-to-face or using video or conference call due to COVID-19. And about 40 to 50 startups, we already have further engagement. That means we sit down with them and revisit the details, the conditions of the cooperation we are talking about. And based on our experience, because we also have our bandwidth need to be considered. So at the same time, there are about 10 to 15 startups we can have deeper collaboration, right? Because we also need to be sure we spend quality of time with the startups we selected. Some people may ask me, Lucia, do you do investing? My answer for now is no. Okay, because our current focus is really on business engagement. But that doesn't mean that we don't do in the future. Actually now, we work closely with our internal CBC or external BC to help them to validate some startup solution using our overall process. And at the same time, we receive the recommendations about what kind of candidates we can consider to co-work. So for the whole ecosystem, we are really hand in hand to do this kind of collaboration. So if I take this chart as example, we can provide the free tools. We can provide the co-working space. Within Acer, we also do competition from time to time. And for Gadgetech, we are glad to do procurement or product co-development with the startups. And we leave the green parts to ecosystem partners at this moment. And of course, future adjustment could be possible. So we will update you later on. All right, so I just walked through about our innovation journey. So the last session I want to talk about is the partners now we are looking for. So let me put back the growth metrics again. So in short, the partners now we are looking for two categories. The first one is who can help us to use their new domain know-how to help us fulfill or increase the value to our existing target audience, right? And for the domain know-how, it's not necessary to be only some hardware stuff. It could be software. It could be AI. So we are very open and flexible to evaluate these kind of offerings. And the second one is the startups who can help us to use our existing offering but engage with new target audience, like Libby's, like e-rosary, the examples I just raised. So in this one, our mission is really to increase the influence toward the new market altogether. So you may ask me, Lucia, you keep mentioning your target audience, then who they are, right? So far, we have targeting 6 areas, right? Including gamers, creators, outdoor lovers. Outdoor lovers means people who like camping or mountain climbing, and so on. And in terms of the field side, we focus on education field, business field, and the last one is humanity and spiritual field. Because we really want to bring the technology not only within certain scope, but expand to more humanity area, to that more people enjoy the convenience brought by technology. I list down some considerations when we decide whether we should work or not, or prioritize the startups based on our experience. Basically, there are 2 aspects we will consider. One is about the solution itself. First of all, we will think about whether that solution can serve our existing, the same target audience I mentioned. And the second one is there any trend or even micro trend behind to support the rationale? And the third one is whether there are some way to validate what the startup trying to tell us. And in the other side, in terms of the attributes, there are also 3 points we will think about. We will prioritize those startups who have experience to engage with corporates because they already know how it works. And they tend to be more passionate. And the second one is whether they are able to specify their own strengths and weakness. Because by doing so, it can shorten dramatically the evaluation lead time we need to undergo between both sides. And the last one is whether the founder can decide the allocation for the home organization he owns. What I mean is, as long as we mutually reach some consensus to go, we hope the following execution can be completely done in this way. So again, we start from the PC peripherals, and now we want to migrate to lifestyle gadgets. So-called lifestyle gadget means the offering that can reveal our target audience lifestyle or enhance their life experience by, first of all, solve their pain points. And the second one is to fulfill their needs. And the last one is to really realize their desire. All right, so that's all for my today's session. I hope there are more and more startups we can engage in. And then next time, I will share with you more. You can reach us via the email listing above. It's business.engagement@gti.com or gti.tech. Or you can also leave message on our website. I will be glad to talk with you in more details. So thank you for your time. I wish you a nice day.
谢谢来自酷基科技的 Lucia 很精彩的分享。宏基集团已经有44岁，但是酷基只有2岁哦。那等于酷基也是在宏基 过去的这个40多年期间，不断的有新创的想法的过程当中，又一波的新创。那我想就是说，他们其实不只担任宏基集团的新创，其实他们的目的也是不断的跟外界的新创好的一些想法跟点子能够再结合，产生更多有趣的一些新的一些应用出来。那以上就是我们今天上午4场的演讲。那我们有来自第一场 PwC 来谈从资本市场看现在的新创的一个发展的新的变化。那第2场来自就是加速器 Techstar 分享他们所看到现在新创的这个社群跟生态的一些最新的一些发展，以及第3场来自前500 Startup 的投资者Marvin 他对于现在所谓的今年的关于新创公司的投资所看到的一些领域和机会，以及第4场我们从酷基科技这边看到一些现在新的一些市场上新创的一些有趣的应用哦，那都非常精彩。那我们今天下午还有4场演讲，那主要的主题会放在 AI 跟5G 这2个主轴上面，那分别有来自 Microsoft 的新创加速器的负责人来分享他们现在所看到的在 AI 跟5G 的这个领域里面的一些新创公司，他们怎么来去做一些筛选跟协助，以及另外有3场呢是我们台湾本地的业者，本地的新创公司来从他们自己现在不管是在零距离的零距离提供的这个服务，或者是有关于智慧医疗等等方面提供他们现在公司所实际操作的一些案子来跟大家做案例的分享。那上午的场次就到这边结束。那我们下午的场次的话，我们从1点半开始入场，欢迎各位能够继续再回来，跟我们一起来探索新的这些发展和趋势。谢谢大家。